2, 3, 4. Let me tell you, PuckPedia stats, contracts, and caps. It's all there for you. One-stop shop for your hockey information. It's a hockey sensation. So log on, log on, log on. If you give a puck, go to PuckPedia.com.
Welcome to Cap Central. It's January 8th, 2026. Happy New Year. We are back in action. I broke Larry David's cardinal rule. You can't wish anyone
I was just going to say, it's too late. Larry David says you can't do that now.
Well, it's myself along with Hart Levine. Hart, how you doing today?
Doing great. Great to be back with you.
Yeah, I'm excited. We had a lot of good signings over the Christmas break. The roster freeze is now officially over. Teams are making some moves, sending some guys up and down. We got some signings happening, extensions, all that good stuff. We hit the January 1st marker where guys who are on one-year deals were officially able to sign contracts. And so before we kind of get into some of these new deals, Hart, we want to talk about this Egor Zamula situation out of Pittsburgh and now Columbus. So if you guys aren't aware, Zamula was traded from the Philadelphia Flyers to the Pittsburgh Penguins in exchange for Philip Tomasino. The Pittsburgh Penguins wanted him to report to Wilkes-Barre, their AHL affiliate. Zamula basically refused to do that. We think a lot of that had to do with maybe an understanding that he had some deals if he were to terminate that contract. And so essentially he was suspended by Pittsburgh and then ultimately terminated contract for breach of contract, which the Penguins were actually pretty fine with anyway, in terms of having a couple extra roster spots for their benefit. And then he ended up signing a one-year deal with the Columbus Blue Jackets for $1 million prorated. And then if we want to pull up this tweet here, Seth, basically, with all that information, he's going to earn about $1.15 million in base salary this season instead of the $1.4 million in his original contract. So, Hart, why don't you talk us through the situation and break down how the dollars and cents played out?
Yeah, the Zamula sweepstakes are over. He's now signed with Columbus.
Sweepstakes.
Yeah, it was some action here at the beginning of January.
Apparently,
yeah, so
like
this
6
is,
teams involved, right? Like it seemed like Columbus wasn't the only one.
yeah. Exactly. There was some action on it. So it's interesting. We've had a few terminations now this year, and with Zamula, he actually had a different agent, but he switched to go with Dan Milstein, who did something similar with Texier earlier this year, where the player wants to play. In Zamula's case, he had been sent to the minors. He didn't want to play in the minors and was willing to terminate and give up some money to sign somewhere where he could play in the NHL. And so he'd been working with Philly on that. They ended up doing this trade to get Tomasino with Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh looked at it as just like they wanted to get off Tomasino's contract. And so they figured either Zamula's in the minors and we can maybe call him up later if we want, or we will terminate him. He'll want to terminate and we'll be free of it. So some people thought like, oh, did Pittsburgh get misled or something? Absolutely not. Like they went into this knowing we're getting rid of Tomasino, that contract, which we don't want. And whatever happens with Zamula, either in the minors, later called up, or terminated, like we're fine with that. And then in Zamula's case, like Pittsburgh, I think gave him a chance to see if he wanted to start in the minors and work his way up there. But from the beginning, I think he'd been pretty clear that he wanted to play in the NHL. He thinks he's an NHL player and was willing to take less money. So his contract, like he already received a $500,000 signing bonus in the summer. So then his base salary was 1.4. When he didn't report to the minors. And again, it wasn't a surprise. That's to do these terminations. That's how it always works. That they basically coordinate the player and the team. The player doesn't report to whether it's like if he's in the NHL to the NHL team or to the minors. And then that gives the team grounds to terminate the contract and the player doesn't fight it or dispute it. So that was, again, not a surprise that he didn't report and then as a result, he was suspended without pay. So he missed a few days of pay there. Terminates, signs for $1 million. And so, yeah, it ended up costing him $250,000 this year. I mean, when you already had a $500,000 signing bonus, you're still going to get $1.15 million total this year. I guess $250,000 is not that much to go from the AHL to the NHL if that's where you want to be, right? So I think for him, it actually worked out pretty well. There's guys that have given up a lot more money than that, like Brandon Saad last year, I think, was more money. So yeah, I think it worked out well for him, and we'll see where he gets to. But that's kind of like the mechanics of how it all played out. And there definitely were 6 teams at least that were interested in him on a lower price. And for him, it really wasn't the money. It was he wants a spot where he at least has a shot to get some NHL games in.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, that 250K number in the grand scheme of things to play in the NHL isn't that much when you look at, like you mentioned, a Brandon Saad or even a Philip Zadina a couple years ago, or David Kampf this year. Like they
Yep.
gave up a lot more guaranteed money to kind of get that NHL situation. And Zamula seemed like he played his hand pretty well. And then the Pittsburgh Penguins side of things too, like they were under the impression that these were all possible scenarios and they were good with whatever course of direction happened. So they weren't necessarily butthurt that this is kind of how it played out either.
Yeah, and like that's a few. I think that's our third termination where the player re-signed in the NHL this year, right? Like so, we had Texier, Kampf, and now this one. We always see terminations players that are in the minors that then they go sign in Europe. So that's not uncommon. Oh, we also saw like Tomasek with Edmonton. He did go sign in Europe after. So, but it just seems like this year there's more where they're like pretty much legit NHL players, and they're being buried either on the depth chart or in the minors, and they're willing to give up money to sign in the NHL with another team. So I wonder if that's a trend. We'll see. I mean, on the one hand, I can't imagine the PA likes that the players are giving up their contracts, but also like if this is what the player wants, I guess they should be supportive. And I wonder if in a future CBA, not we're a long ways from that, but in a future CBA, I wonder if there's like a cleaner mechanism for this type of thing to work out where a player can get released and signed somewhere else, because it is like kind of a lot of administrative work. Like again, the player has to work out with the team that they're not going to report, then they can formally be suspended without pay, then they can be terminated and they agree not to like file a grievance for that termination. It's like a lot of steps and paperwork. I wonder if they might simplify that in the future.
Yeah, it's a good thought process, especially because like we've seen a few examples this year where, in previous years, you don't really see this happening all that much. And who knows how it looks in the future with some certain teams having, some roster spots open and other teams like in the camp situation, the Maple Leafs had way too many forwards on their roster
Yeah.
to deal with that. And so it just made sense. So we'll see how it all plays out in the future. If it's a new CBA kind of, well, like Hart said, that's down the line. They just agreed to the recent one that wasn't even kicked in yet. So we'll see how that all plays out. But let's get into some of these signings that had happened kind of over the Christmas winter break here. We're going to start with Christian Dvorak first. And his is an interesting one because he was on a 1-year deal. So he was making about $5.4 million this year. And because he was on a 1-year deal, he wasn't actually eligible to sign a new contract until January 1st. And then just a few days after that, kind of date passes by, we see he signs a 5-year deal with a $5.15 million AAV. Takes him through his age 35 season. If you look at the structure of this deal, he's got a full no trade clause in his first 2 years, and then a 20-team no trade clause in year 3, 5-team no trade clause in year 4, and then no trade protection in year 5. He did get a little bit of structure in this deal. He's got $3 million in signing bonus the first 2 years, and then a $2 million signing bonus in year 3. He's currently kind of having his best year to date. So he's pacing for about 50 plus points on the season. A lot of that is playing with Trevor Zegras this year, who's having a really strong year for the Philadelphia Flyers. The Flyers also are in a playoff spot right now. They have 51 points, 6.622 point percentage. They're currently in Metro 3. So to me, I don't know how I feel about this deal because you're paying a guy at his absolute peak value. Like he's also like, he's not like a young player. I think he's 29 years old right now, about to be 30. He hasn't had proven results consistently that this is the type of player he is. And the 5-year term is kind of a lot of term for a player like this. So I think, sometimes teams get excited and they bite the bullet a little bit on that. But you're hoping if you're going to pay all that term that maybe you're getting a little discount on the AAV. And I'm not necessarily sure that they also got a discount on the AAV there.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it from his perspective, him and his agent's perspective. Like, I think they played this quite well, right? Like, this is similar to what you see a lot in baseball. They call them like pillow contracts, where a player goes to the market, they don't really like the long-term deal.
Cody Bellinger is like an example right now.
Exactly. Years ago, the Blue Jays was Marcus Semien, right? Where they sign a 1-year deal, someplace where they think they could be successful. They get good money on that 1-year deal. They're not signing for like a cheap deal, but they're only signing for 1 year. And then they can go back to the market where they think, they'll be in a stronger position. So, I don't have any insight on this, but just imagine like in the summer when he took this 1-year 5.4, he probably had offers of 2-3 year deals at less money, right? Like maybe 3, 4, 5 million. And he turned that down. He took this 5.4. And so he's basically now signed like a 6-year deal, 5.2 or 5.3 million. That's a pretty good deal. He obviously would have taken that in the summer, but instead of like losing that opportunity by signing for 2 or 3 years at lower money, he bets on himself, still gets paid properly for that 1 year, bets on himself, finds himself a good position. And yeah, now he's basically got that 6-year deal in the low fives like he wanted. So I think that was well played. But yeah, to your point, for a guy that hasn't really put up big scoring numbers in his career, that's a decent term and number. I think we talk about this with all these signings, especially the longer term ones. With the way that the cap's going up, like we just have to get used to like a $5 million player in 3 years is probably like a third line center. Like that's probably where we get to right now. There's like a little bit of sticker shock, and when you plug it on a depth chart, it looks like a big cap number. In your maybe not in your top 6 always. But there's definitely some risk associated with it. You mentioned the structure. There is no signing bonus in year 4 and 5. So, potentially it could be bought out. It's not as punitive to be bought out. Obviously, when you sign a contract, you don't plan to buy it out, but you have to kind of plan for it. And yeah, even in that last year, there's no clause at all. So, what are the chances he plays this whole contract out with Philadelphia? I guess, we'll have to see. You could bet on that on CoolBet, but I think it's a good bet for now for both sides. It's a good fit, and then you kind of just like deal with the future when it comes.
Definitely. And I think like for the player, I think he played this about as well as he could have, because one, like, obviously in the summer, you don't know what kind of year you're going to have. You're hoping it's a pretty good year. It's about as good of a start to the season as he could have had. But then also too, just looking at like how the market is evolving, right? So over the summer, you had quite a few teams with a good amount of salary cap space. So they're totally fine taking on this 1-year deal at a little bit of a higher number, maybe like that $5.4 million. Like maybe he's not worth that over a longer term deal, but he's worth that maybe in a year where a team's not in salary cap, issues. And then now he's at a point where he's going to go back to the market with the salary cap about to explode. And so he's able to get a deal at that 5.15 million. Like you said, if you average it over 6 years, it's like 5.2, 5.3. Like that ends up being a pretty good deal for the player. And so I think, we're going to, maybe we'll see more players doing that, this upcoming off season. If they don't like the number that they're getting on a long-term deal, maybe they take a 1-year deal at a high number with these teams having caps and the exploding, salary cap. And that might be kind of the way that this July 1 plays out, especially with all the superstars kind of already being locked down.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we've seen a little bit of that, like the offseason a couple of years ago where Toronto signed Bertuzzi and Domi to 1-year deals, right? But we don't see a lot of it. And it's actually usually at a discount. I guess Taylor Hall, when he signed that 1-year deal with Buffalo, that's a good example. Right? I think that was like $8 million.
It was like 8 or 9, yeah.
So that was getting like full price, but on a 1-year deal. I think could be a good template to do that. Because typically, I mean, we just mentioned some examples, but typically the player goes to free agency and they just take like the best deal that they can get, even if it's not what they're hoping for long term, right? They take the most like total money. But I think this is a good template to like, just take a 1-year deal in a good spot, but don't give up like much cash. Maybe not the absolute most dollars you can get because you're going to find the right spot, but you don't have to sign, a bargain basement price. And then, go back to the market and you can sign a long-term deal. I think it's something to watch for going forward. Like let's say a guy like, Radish in Tampa, right? If people aren't believing that this is like what he can actually do, and his offers are sort of like somewhere in between what he's done before in this year, if he really wants to bet on himself, maybe he does like do a 1-year deal, and now he has like 2 really good years, and now he's in a completely different spot as a free agent in that next summer versus where he might be this summer, where some teams are potentially sort of skeptical that this is like who he is going forward.
Yeah, speaking of Radish too, did you see JBB's comments about the player today and like the contract situation there? He was very like insightful about, he's like, we kind of don't know what this player is, and we want a larger sample size. Like we obviously, think we want him to be here long term, but he was essentially like, we're trying to figure out if this is just a 1-year wonder or if this is something that's sustainable over time. But I thought it was interesting that like a GM was so transparent talking to the media about like, he's actually like really kind of going down and breaking down what kind of value this player has for the future for the team.
Yeah, and so if you're like you hear the GM say that, you're him. Clearly, Tampa's not going to pay him like a long-term deal. Like they aren't convinced that this is who he is long-term yet, right? And so, will they offer him a long-term contract potentially? But it's going to be like a little discounted from if this is who he is going forward. So again, like if you're in his position, maybe it's worth signing a 1 or 2-year deal at decent money, but not locking yourself in long term, so that, and betting on yourself that now you have a couple of years like this, you're in a whole different ballpark financially.
Yeah, he's basically said he said like he bleeds blue. He's helping us win. Like we want him to stay. But then he was like, I think we're gonna wait, not because it's gonna be a life-changing contract, but because you look at his play the first year with us, his play last year, his play at the start of this season, and his play now. I'm going to need a bigger sample size to know exactly how to value that going forward. So I thought that was just interesting.
Pretty fair and honest, yeah.
Exactly. Let's keep it moving here. Let's go over this Alex Wennberg contract with the San Jose Sharks. So Alex Wennberg gets a 3-year, $6 million AAV contract, 5.8% of the projected salary cap next season. Again, takes him through his age 34 season. He did get a little structure in this as well, $2 million signing bonus in year 1. But then no signing bonuses in year 2 or 3. So to Hart's point, maybe possibly a buyout, candidate if he needs to, like the structure's there for that planning for the future. Full no trade clause in years 1 and 2, and then a 12-team no trade clause in year 3. He was just named to Team Sweden for the Olympics. He has 29 points this year in 42 games. But to his point, I got into it with some San Jose Sharks fans because initially I thought that was just a little bit of an overpay for a guy like Alex Wennberg. But to Hart's point, like these sticker shock values might not be as crazy in the next couple seasons. And it was only a 3-year term. But basically Sharks fans were arguing that he is playing some of the toughest minutes in the NHL this season. So it is taking a lot off Macklin Celebrini's plate, and then possibly Michael Misa if he were to step into a 2C role in the next season or two. But he also, he has pretty break-even underlying numbers in those tough minutes. And San Jose right now is in a playoff spot. They're currently in wild card 1. They have 47 points, 548 point percentage. And they also need to get to the cap floor next year, which Hart doesn't like that argument. But the Sharks do have $47 million in projected space for next season. They also basically need to re-sign an entire decor. Dmitry Orlov and then Sam Dickinson are the only 2 players on their current NHL roster who have a contract for next season. They have a couple RFAs, and then the rest of their decor is UFA. So they definitely need to make some signings. But I feel like now I'm at a point where I think this is a decent deal for both sides. I think Wennberg's played pretty well, and he's done his role, what he needs to be. He's not going to be, an offensive producer, and he is taking a lot of defensive responsibility away from Macklin to let him do his thing. And so I think that's kind of where that deal shook out.
Yeah, I'd say similarly. When I first heard the price, I thought, oh, seems like a big contract for him. Because when you just look at his basic stats, he's not like a big point producer. But yeah, you look a little under the hood, like the possession metrics are quite strong, and then the quality of competition. I think the big thing is the term. Like, I think if that's a 6-year deal or 5-year deal, even, you think, even with the cap going up, do you really want a guy with that profile, like in his age 35, 36 season, that's not going to do that well? On a 3-year deal, even if he falls off in that 3rd year, you're almost at the end of it and potentially could be moved, or, a guy's overpaid. You can live with a guy being overpaid for like a year, where he is on your depth chart. So I liked it from that perspective. And from his perspective, he's getting paid quite good money. The option is don't sign this, and then again, go to the market, and maybe on the market, there's a 5 times 4.5, right? This way you take your 6 million, and then you go back to the market. You're at the end of your career, but at that point, like we talked about, 3rd line players are going to be getting close to that money, and you could probably make more career earnings that way. So that makes sense. I'm kind of tired of the needing to get to the cap floor argument. As we just saw with San Jose this year, like they took Carey Price and Ryan Ellis, and really they didn't even get much in way of assets for that. I'd pulled before, like teams that are desperate to get to the floor next year, guys that I'm sure are very available would be Alex Pietrangelo, Torrey Krug. There's still Logan Couture, and Ellis still has a year left on his deal. I mean, I know those guys are already with them, but there's always going to be kind of zombie contracts out there that you can get. To me, like the return for taking on Price and Ellis this year was a little light in my mind. So I don't think you have to worry about getting to the floor. And I don't really like that argument when teams make decisions that, they have to get to the floor. There's lots of ways to get to the floor that don't necessarily have to like excuse for signing bad contracts. There's a lot of contracts out there that you can get paid to take.
Exactly. So Sharks fans, stop coming at our necks over here. We're on boat now that I think it was a solid deal. They kept the term relatively fair for both sides. They didn't go overboard with it. And, you know, they're not going to get an offensive stalwart at $6 million, but they might get a really quality third line center that can help Macklin Celebrini eat some of his minutes and Michael Misa for the future. So, Sharks fans, you know, relax over here. You guys are in a playoff spot. Enjoy the success of the season. Enjoy watching a bunch of your players in the Olympics. And we'll see how it plays out next year. Let's go into the last big deal I would say that was signed over this break here, and that's JJ Moser with the Tampa Bay Lightning. So Moser came over in the Sergachev deal from Utah and has had honestly a breakout year this year. He's 25 years old and he signed an 8-year, $6.75 million AAV extension, 6.5% of the salary cap. And this will take him now through his age 34 season. This contract has some structure, huge signing bonus in the first 2 years, $7.9 million in year one, $7.4 million in year two. And then it's interesting. So there's no signing bonus in years 3 through 5, but then there's a $1 million signing bonus in years 6 through 8. Full no trade clause in years 1 through 3, and then 16 team no trade clause, no trade list in years 4 through 8. He was also named to the Olympics for Switzerland. And yeah, like I said, he's having his best season. He's not necessarily a point producer as well, but with Hedman injured, he's kind of taken over that top pairing spot, and he's done really well. I did have one question for you, Hart, before you want to dive into this. So he's an RFA with arb rights at the end of the season, but I did see he had trade protection in year one. So I'm curious, like, how that's possible.
No, he can't officially have trade protection until his UFA season, which is the second year of the deal.
Okay.
You know, often though the language in the contract will say he has a no trade clause like as soon as permissible. And so I'm assuming that's how it was written. And I'm sure there's a bit of a handshake that he's not going to be, you know, not going to be traded now. This is a deal that I think has a potential to be a real home run for Tampa. I mean, you look at some of their other deals that they've signed that have ended up being like big bargains, and this could be right in that mix. The thing with Moser is like he's not a big point producer, and just like, you know, even though he's a defenseman, most players in the NHL, the biggest predictor of contract are points, and so that's definitely like, you know, potentially limits his future contract. And that's why I think that's part of why it's 6.75 and not 8 or 9 or 10 million. But if you look at like his minutes and his underlying metrics this year, obviously like having a huge breakthrough season, I think it's a little bit similar to what we talked about, like with Radish, is like, is he this guy or is he the guy the last couple of years that showed flashes, but hasn't been like at this level? And to me, it looks like they're paying, like they're heavily discounting this season, right? Like if this is the guy he is, if he were to sign this contract after doing this a couple of years, like, and then hit free agency, he would sign for a lot more money. So that's why I think they're getting like, you know, in the bucket of waiting, maybe it's like a third of waiting that this is who he is, and the other 2/3 is more of like what he's shown. And so that's why you end up with like a pretty good price. And, you know, let's just say he falls back a little bit. Having a guy in his mid to late 20s at 6.75, even if he's on your second pairing and is really solid, like, I mean, I think that's going to look fine. I mean, we saw Edmonton sign Wallman 7x7. He's several years older, and he's definitely a second pairing guy. Whereas Moser's shown that he can play in the first pairing. So I think this looks like it's a potential to be a steal for Tampa, and I think that the downside risk isn't that bad. Like I don't think this will ever end up. There's no chance that this ends up being a terrible contract.
No, and if you look at like the cap percentage, it's probably similar to like what Florida did with Gustav Forsling, where he's not a guy that's going to be a crazy point producer, but he had bounced around a little bit and then had a really solid year with Florida, and then they made a long-term bet that was going to be the kind of player he was, but got a discount on the AAV, and then that's turned out to being one of the best defensive contracts in the NHL to date. So I see a lot of similarities with like that kind of deal for Moser here.
Definitely.
Cool. Yeah, that'll wrap up all the signings. And then Hart, you want to talk maybe one more about Sasson? You were getting some questions about how his contract was talked about before January 1, but then it couldn't get officially registered till that date.
Yeah, so Sasson was on a 1-year deal, meaning he wasn't eligible for an extension until Jan 1. And but Vancouver announced, I think it was on like December 15th, that he signed an extension. So questions like, how were they able to do that? Well, the answer is anyone can issue a press release. They just announced that he signed an extension, but we saw actually on January 1st, then it was officially registered. So again, teams can announce things. We see that a lot with like transactions. The team will tweet out a player was called up or sent down or put on IR, and actually often it already kind of happened after that day for cap purposes, and it technically happens like the next day. So yeah, the actual transaction happened on January 1st, the contract signing.
Cool. Good to know there. Sometimes teams are announcing things before they're officially kind of put into the system. And so
Exactly.
I think that's the confusion with fans. So it's good to get that clarification here. Let us wrap up the episode here with our Q&A. It's presented by our friends over at CoolBet. Stay cool and bet responsibly. If you go to puckpedia.com/coolbet, you can get in on the action today. puckpedia.com/coolbet. The question is from our friend Steven, who from New York, and he was asking about the New York Rangers. And so the other day, the Rangers had placed Igor Shesterkin on normal IR, but then they placed Adam Fox on LTIR. And Steven's question was, what was the reasoning that they placed Fox on LTIR so quick? A lot of teams don't necessarily place guys on LTIR until they need the cap space. So and also, when you put a guy on LTIR, he has to miss a minimum of 10 games and 24 days. So, and there was also an injury where fans didn't really see like where Fox got injured. And so Steven was wondering kind of why the Rangers went that route so quickly in this situation.
Yeah, the reason why sometimes teams wait to put a player on LTIR, to your point, they don't know if they're going to miss the 10 games and 24 days. And that always goes back to when they last played. It doesn't matter. Like, even if a player was put on LTIR 2 weeks later, it's still, that requirement goes back to when they last played. But sometimes they don't know. Yeah, they don't know how much they're going to miss. Other times, like, it can also depend on other players that are injured. So like the Rangers, they have Sheary and Edstrom on LTIR. Like, teams might be thinking like, okay, this new injury, he's going to be out definitely a long time, but our other guys are going to be back soon. Do we want to still be an LTIR team and have the cap consequences of that when those other guys come back? Or do we want to be able to like kind of refresh, not have a player on LTIR? Maybe we can reset our pool, or we can accrue some more space. So it's not even like the injured players. Sometimes it's like the players that have already been injured and the overall situation. So typically, like in general, I would say teams don't put a player on LTIR unless they need to. They wait as long as possible. So they needed the cap space by putting someone on the LTIR, and they went with Fox instead of Shesterkin, just knowing that Fox is definitely going to be out that long, whereas Shesterkin, maybe they think there's a chance he'll be out less time. I guess that's the simplest way.
And they get the same benefit for both players this year with the new kind of rules in the CBA. They only get that $3.82 million LTIR benefit for salary cap purposes. So it's not like if Fox and Shesterkin were both projected to be out, they would probably put Shesterkin on LTIR to coop up the more because he has a higher contract than Fox does.
Yeah. So yeah, injured players on LTIR, if they're going to come back during this season, the maximum benefit is that 3.8 million. So to your point, yeah, there was no cap benefit by picking one versus the other. It would be more of a strategic thing on timing, I would say.
And then there was also a situation with the Rangers too. I wanted to bring up quickly before we wrap up here, and it was when so Brennan Othmann had got sent down to the minors right before the Winter Classic, with the reasoning being that because not only his like normal cap hit isn't just his base salary, because he has these performance bonuses, his cap hit actually is like a bit higher. And so if the Rangers were to send down Othmann, they actually were able to call up two players. So they called up Justin Dowling and Anton Blid. And a lot of that was just based off of the cap situation. So I don't know if you have it in front of you or if you're able to talk on that real quickly.
Yeah, so when a team starts LTIR, the performance bonuses of the players on the roster at that moment go in a pool. And then at any point, if players on the roster have performance bonuses that exceed that pool, it's a reduction in cap space. And so the Rangers, they didn't have Othmann and some of these guys with performance bonuses on the roster when they started LTIR. So when they get called up, they get charged not just their regular cap hit, but also their average performance bonuses, which that's actually their AAV. So Othmann is being when he's called up, instead of his 863 cap hit, he's taking up 1.3 million, which is his AAV, because you have to account for his performance bonuses. And so that can have an impact on players getting called up and down. In Edmonton, for example, like Ike Howard, he wasn't in their initial LTIR capture. So he's at like a $1.6 million cap charge when he's called up, because they don't have room for his performance bonuses. And so, that can really have a big impact. And that's sort of the mechanics and why teams aren't always making roster moves based on who's the absolute best lineup. There's obviously like cap and financial implications of the moves.
And just to clarify that quick too, that's only when teams are in LTIR. If a team's not in LTIR and the player gets called up, it's just their normal base salary is their AAV or their cap hit.
Yeah, performance bonuses do not impact the cap during the regular season, except in a couple situations. One is if the team's in LTIR, the potential performance bonuses on the roster at that point can't exceed when they set LTIR, or the difference is a reduction in the LTIR space available. The other exception, which we actually have a few this year, is teams can only have potential performance bonuses on the roster up to 7.5% of the cap. That's called the bonus cushion. If you have performance bonuses more than that, it's a reduction in cap space. So we have teams like San Jose, Detroit, Chicago, because they have these like basically top couple picks that have these massive performance bonuses, it pushes them over that threshold. And so it reduces cap space. For everyone else, the performance bonuses don't impact the regular season at all. At the very end of the season, and when the season's completed, then you look to see how the performance bonuses that were actually earned by players, those get added then to the final end of season cap hit, like after the season ends. And if that new total is over the salary cap of 95.5 million this year, anything over that is a cap charge for the following season called a bonus carryover overage. So that's how it works. So most cases, teams don't have to worry about performance bonuses until at the end of the season, and then they can determine if it's going to affect them the following season, except in those couple of examples of LTIR, or if a team has more than 7.5% of the cap in terms of potential bonuses.
I think you just got all the math nerds fired up with all those nuances and those calculations. So it's good to get that insight, because that's not something that's obvious to a casual fan. And so that's what we're trying to provide here. Well, cool. That is all the time we have today's episode. Thank you everyone for joining. Don't forget to subscribe to the PuckPedia YouTube. We just had Lester McLean, former TSN correspondent. Great episode with Lester. He wrote the PuckPedia theme song that you hear at the beginning of this episode. He did some stuff with James Duthie over at TSN. He's wrote some jingles. Bad for Bedard is the most recent one. I'm sure you guys have heard that going through the hockey sphere. Great episode. Definitely tune in. Subscribe to the YouTube on PuckPedia. Also get good content on Instagram. And then you guys obviously know about the Twitter already. So, and then obviously go to puckpedia.com to get all the insight, salary cap information, etc. So thank you so much for the time. Hart, any last words?
No, thanks for following along, and send in your questions either on Twitter or on the website, Ask the Capologist, and we can answer them next episode.
Awesome.
PuckPedia.com